I went through everything there is to know about the hardest part of the game, the early game, and today I'm going to see how many tips I can get through in 8 minutes so you guys can improve. We have to start with the first part of the game, your plan. Really detailed plans are key to surviving off spawn. For starters, you need to know where you're going to be dropping. You need a spot that has the right amount of loot, materials, mobility, and population. When you're choosing a drop spot, ask yourself these questions. Does the spot have more than 6 chests? Can you get max mats there? How can you rotate from the spot and get surge if needed? How many people will land there? And what else does a spot have that gives you an advantage? Think about where the location is on the map, if you have mobility, and in what areas surround that spot. Also ensure that there aren't so many people landing there that it will make you less consistent. And when you think about extras, things like non-boxes, slurp barrels, slipstreams, or built-in launch pads can really help. Having a solid plan off spawn will ensure that you are more prepared than your opponent, so you'll drop in with an immediate advantage. Guys, I have a ton of tips written down here for you. I don't even know if I'll be able to get through them all. I guess we'll have to see. You also need to make sure that you drop at your spot a lot in arena and scrims. This will help you learn the ins and outs of your drop, help you navigate it more fluently without really needing to think about the best places to go, and make sure that you know the little secrets of your spots, like areas you can't build and things like that. Your drop is also really important for early game. The first way to do this is with a drop map. A drop map is basically a map of your drop spot that you make on Fortnite.gg that has all the places you need to deploy your glider for the best drop marked around it. I know it's boring, but taking some time to sit down and use a drop calculator and Fortnite.gg to make a map of the best drops for your drop spot will give you such a massive advantage. This will give you all the benefits of being on the ground first, like getting to beam people or loot faster. A second method that you can use for dropping if you don't want to make a drop map is just to glide in high, scout out the drop, and drop at the part of the location with the least amount of people. This will ensure that you don't have to take a 50-50 off spawn ever. For this to work though, you're going to need to have multiple loot paths planned out and probably memorized, one for each part of the drop. For example, for Sweaty Sands, you should have a loot path that starts here, and you get the idea. Both dropping strategies are viable in most situations, but in a custom lobby format, you're much better with a proper drop map and loot route. Speaking of loot routes, contrary to popular belief, your loot route shouldn't just contain chest and floor spawns. You also need to put heavy focus on securing maximum materials as fast as possible by knowing and hitting the highest density material spots. You need to prioritize density of materials over pure amount of materials in early game because people have so little mats that it's just about getting the mats the fastest so you can have an advantage. Imagine you and another player land at opposite sides of the same location. You land on the side with only 250 mats of wood, but they're in the form of wood pallets, and your opponent lands on the other side where he has max wood, but it's only in trees. Because pallets give more mats faster, you can get the 250 mats and then force a fight on your opponent when they'll only have 150 mats because they'll get mats much slower. However, don't let yourself get tunnel vision going for one loot route. It'll still mostly be better to just have a building to yourself than commit to your own loot path if someone is already landing at it. So far, we've gotten through basically everything you need to know about preparation for early game, but the next part of the video will be even more helpful. These are just some really useful general early game tips. First up, always keep track of your opponent. From when you see them in the sky, you should always keep track of them, where they land, where you hear them rotating, and try to keep a mental note of how much loot they might have and where they might be by the time you finish your loot route. You can use this knowledge to your advantage because you'll know how much loot your opponent has, so you can know when to engage if you have really good loot, or where to go if you need more loot, and you'll also have a much better chance of sneaking up on them, something that you should always be looking to do in early game. Sneaking up on people and beaming them before the fight starts is something that you should always look to do, but it's so much better in early game because people have way less mats and shield, so if you hit them for 60, not only do you use almost all of their shield and make them use their spare shield, you've also used a lot of their mats. Think of it like this: if you beam someone in mid game and they have max mats and they build 4 walls, you've only used 2% of their builds, but if you beam someone in early game and they build 4 walls, they most likely have no more than 300 mats, so you'll use 13% of their builds, making the beam 6 times as effective in early game. Sorry for you guys who hate maths, but basically all you need to know is that sneaking up on people and beaming them in early game is OP. Now, we've talked about the importance of getting more mats in early game because if your opponent runs out before you, it's basically a free kill, but I also need to remind you not to neglect ammo boxes either. If you run out of ammo, your weapons are literally useless, so just a quick cone onto an ammo box while you're running in a building can help a lot. While you're going around buildings, you should also look to break floors instead of using stairs because it will give you some mats and save you a bit of time as well. Be really strict on the loot routes and exactly where you go and what you break and loot because a few seconds can be the difference in early game. Just imagine that you can loot and farm the same amount as your opponent 5 seconds faster. Then you'll have 5 seconds to pop a big pot or 2 minis and that'll immediately put you at a 50 shield advantage. Try to stay on the outskirts of the area if there are a lot of people there because everyone will be able to collapse in on the center if they see a fight, but not on the outskirts, so you'll have much less third parties in your fights. If you're ever in one of those pesky stalemate teammates off spawn, make sure you're farming up a ton of mats so you can have a mat advantage and then go for a play when it's in your favor. Never just sit around and do nothing waiting for something to happen. Always play slow and be patient in these fights. Use buildings, doorways, and minimize builds to get right hand peeks on your opponent so you can force an optimal engagement. Patience is necessary as well. Don't make impulsive decisions or let yourself get caught in bad positions. Don't try to build fight someone early game because it will attract more people and you'll run out of mats faster than you can say hit the like button on this video, which you should do, by the way. Play the fights out more like a box fight and you'll see a lot more success. However, reality is that you really just need to grind, and repetition is the best way to gain confidence off spawn. Commit multiple sessions of playing scrims or arena to learning one spot, and that way you'll just be able to repeat the process and not only master those spots and have more in your repertoire, but you'll also be able to be better in early game in general because you'll get better at adapting to different spots. Speaking of scrim sessions, you also need to prioritize scrims a lot, especially if your spot's an outskirt spot, because in arena those spots aren't really contested, but they will be in tournaments, so you need to play scrims to practice off spawn. In general though, you want to play scrims because people will play much more seriously than they do in arena off spawn, so you can practice proper off spawn fighting. Don't ever make the mistake of getting emotional and thinking of games being griefed and trying to kill someone. As soon as you use your emotion to make a decision, you've already lost. Don't be afraid to just leave a fight off spawn either. You can dip if worst comes to worst depending on the conditions. If you're in a solo cache and you have more games, then probably just going for the kill or a 50-50 if you really need it is better, but if you're in a finals or custom lobby type tournament, it's definitely going to be better to just disengage and squeeze every possible point you can from the game. We're so far in and we haven't even gotten to the 3 advantages that you need in order to succeed in early game. I hope we'll get there in time. For the vast majority of cases, these are the 3 things that you need to have checked off to get an advantage before you opt to take a fight or engage someone in early game. This is a nice concise way of reminding yourself of all the tips we've been through in this video by giving yourself a nice checklist to think through when you're in early game. The first advantage is health. Health is just a simplified way of talking about controlling loot. You need to control as much loot as possible and as much of the drop. Next advantage, mats. This one is pretty basic, just get more mats. Usually 500 is a good amount to have before you go into a fight. However, it will depend on your drop spot. Drop spots that have you fight more in buildings and not out in the open will require less mats and vice versa. Don't rush fights and always make sure to have the mats you need to fight anyone no matter the circumstances. And the last advantage is height. Just keep in mind that height is far more important in early game than it is in mid game fights. From height, you can control the pace of the fight, choose when and how to disengage or engage, and spam down the opponent's mats without getting hit back. Okay, that's everything I got for this video. I'm amazed that I could fit it all into 8 minutes of content. Subscribe.